Anyway, you are listening to the 54665.
Segue.
How do I segue?
No, go ahead. Go.
You are
Go,
listening to
go.
the 54665. All things rural economic development, all things rural America, and all things Viroqua. And today we have with us a very special guest. I would go so far as to say a pillar in the community and a titan in the finance industry.
Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Mr. Tom Weston. Tom, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Great. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do?
Well, I tell you, I came to the area in 1987. Grew up in Juneau County, about an hour and a half east of here. Background, fairly typical in finance and economics from UW-Oshkosh, and graduated and did what probably 99% of the kids want to do. I went to the Twin Cities or some big city, and I loved the city. Hated my job. And growing up in a small, about a 1,500 person town, ended up in Viroqua about 6 months later. And yeah, it's been awesome. And along the way, I've continued some education, MBA in finance, and graduate degree from UW-Madison in the Graduate School of Banking, and managed to find a woman that thought it would be okay for us to get married, and we have 4 wonderful children and couple of labs, and we're raising them, and it's been outstanding. It's gotten richer and better as time goes by,
That's
know,
awesome.
for sure. Mm-hmm. So,
can you talk a little bit, Tom, about that experience of being from a small town, and moving to the city? If you can go back and think about what that was like. I know for me, that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted to be in a place where I was anonymous and I had to fight and scrap for it. And ultimately, I hated it.
Yeah.
What was that like for you? What brought you to Viroqua?
Yeah, I think that growing up in a small community, it's fantastic. But there's something about that outside of that radius. Even in college, I to a certain extent, you kind of stay within that box. Mm-hmm. And there's something about not knowing. Of course, I had a friend that was up there, and all the things you can do, all the fun things, they all take money. So you're learning about earning money, and you're learning about budgeting, and all those types of things. And it was super interesting. I was working, as my dad put it, I took early retirement from my first job out of college, and I was working a third shift at a large printing facility, looking for a job during the day. And I noticed, kind of cruising through the Star Trib, Southeast Minnesota, Southwestern Wisconsin, Rural Community Bank, and it had a description, and I looked at it. Of course, I took the marker and circled it, and I looked at it again, and I thought, yeah. And so I called and interviewed up in the Twin Cities area, and interviewed a couple times down here, and the rest is history.
And this is where you landed.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, the job
Pretty
brought
cool.
me here. Yeah. So, and for me, outside of maybe Sugar Creek a couple of times when I was younger, and DeSoto occasionally, and non-conference, athletics, this, we'd go to Hillsboro, Richland Center. This part of the country was like, for us in Juneau County, we were always Eastside, Madison, Toma, Boston. Our world just didn't come this way, but here it is.
Here you are. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So 87, I mean, that's kind of close to the inception of the actual organization, the Chamber Main Street.
Yep.
And you've kind of been a part of this from day one, right? Yep. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the neat thing about that whole process, I jotted down some notes. I remember vividly Ole Broughton and Dave Peterson at the time coming and talking to me about being a part of the chamber and being active, and those types of things I'll never forget. And certainly the bank encouraged, community involvement for sure. I think being, if I can say, a young professional in Viroqua, 23 at the time, I really lacked a tremendous amount of perspective on exactly what Main Street meant. Mm-hmm. But the unique thing about the way it was set up and structured. I wouldn't call it siloed, but you know, economic development and marketing and those types of things. It allowed everyone to come to the table, something that piqued their interest. Maybe they wanted to have their hat in the ring and help out and participate. And so that format really helped me quite a bit. Certainly dive in on the economic restructuring side of things, because that's kind of where my head is, you know, quite a bit. But it allowed me to be a part of it and feel a part of it. And so the way that originally got set up, it just fostered that. I certainly for me, and hopefully, you know, for a lot of folks. So
Yeah. It's just, this is so bad when I have to clear my throat, but it is so meaningful to have that work that was done 30 years ago put in place as a guideline for the rest of us that are trying to do the work now, and then continue some of that same messaging and work with similar goals and continue to try to expand offerings. The folks who are in charge of being ahead of the game and visionaries as far as the National Main Street accreditation really set Viroqua up for success then and now. And it's really 30 years in the Main Street program is really amazing. So I don't know if I always get to tell you how grateful I am. So since you're sitting right in front of me, I can tell you now, but it really does. It's very special. And there are so many different communities that are only in their fourth or fifth year, and they're not able to quite get the diversity of programming and some of the other more sophisticated offerings that we're able to have here. And it's because we haven't had to spend so much time forming the organization. That was done for us. So I think a lot of the success that we see now is because of the work that was done before.
Yeah,
so we're very grateful.
And thinking back and of the mix of the people that are still a very active part of our community as they were then, that kept the dynamics going. You know, if you're up one day or for a week and then the next week you're going in a different direction, you've got all these people that know what's going on to keep the floats in the water. And not everybody's firing on all cylinders every day.
Right.
But we had enough people, and a core group of people for sure, especially at the top, you know, more mature leadership side of things, at least from my perspective at 23 at the time, and going in through my early 20s, that it was awesome. And then the bumper rails that came with it, from the support from, you know, the program itself, when you'd have the professionals come in to kind of tie some things together. If you started to lose a little bit, okay, so why are we doing this, and how is this dovetailing with this piece of the puzzle? It's it's really well done. So yeah.
Would you feel like this, the organization kind of in some ways provided, the structure of like mentorship that, you know, I to hear you say that at 23, coming into a small community, starting a professional career, but then also starting like a legacy of community involvement. Sometimes it's hard to find those mentors who are there and available and engaged,
Right.
that really do put the formula in front of, you know, younger leaders, so to speak. Would you say that that was kind of the part of the scenario?
I think so. If now, you know, not really even acknowledging or knowing what was going on, those people were a part of our community. And just like whether at work or not, you know, you are where you are today based on the work that was done by those before you, growing on it, building on it, or learning from it and going a different direction regardless of what happened. So lots of good things with various, you know, long time stable community businesses that have seen, you know, a lot of different storms, you know, and we continue to see them and will. It's just part of it, you know, the constant being change, you know, and stuff like that. But yeah, that mentorship part of it, and making sure, for me especially, formally or not, staying connected with those businesses that have been around for a while, plus grabbing the excitement, which there always is with a brand new business, and being into the fabric of how this has changed in downtown since I came here. It's changed a lot.
Right.
but how resilient. It's awesome.
Right.
You know.
It is.
Can we talk about that a little bit? Because I know, in the connection to my exodus out of Vernon County as a kid, downtown Main Street, I remember and have very vivid memories of the Coast to Coast store and the J.C. Penney store and the Ben Franklin and the Super Value and Ted and Fred's, and like growing up in that fabric of Viroqua. And by the time I had graduated high school in 1998, most of those businesses, if not all of them, had departed.
Yeah.
It was a really different landscape. Can you talk a little bit about the resiliency of Viroqua as a community and the, some of the cyclical nature that I can only assume you've seen?
Yeah. Difficult, tough times for a lot of folks. I think there was probably more than even I realized, a lot of deep concern about the changes that were going on with the way people shopped and the traffic flows and just the demographics and the patterns that were going on. And some of these businesses, like you talked about, and we've all heard of stories way before my time about the number of gas stations, the shoe stores, and all the stuff this community was able to support and how that shifted. I think embrace is not the right word, but, certainly I would say by and large, a strong recognition by several businesses that had been here a long time to know when is when. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but a recognition of where it's at and, okay, I still love this community. I still want to be here if I can. What am I going to do? Can I reinvent if I own the building or have a space? But if I can't function as that coast to coast or whatever the case may be, what's it going to look like for me? Do I have to change careers? What an important part of the building we're in and the technical college in helping, re-engage people to repurpose, where they want to be, especially if this is a place where they want to live. So I think there was just a tremendous of that going on, partly out of necessity, and maybe mostly out of necessity just because of the shift. I always equated, when I came to town, it was fantastic. Every ridge had a barn light on and cows were being milked, out of just unfortunate normal attrition. Some of the barns are still there and the lights that are on are just yard lights. A lot of that stuff happened off of hard work and at least one of the spouses typically working outside of the home. That wasn't atypical of Main Street either. There were a few mom and pops that they managed to raise a family, but I think quite often there was a lot of one was at the store and one was somewhere else, whether for benefits or balance or a combination of both. And I think it just kind of rolls into that resiliency and people recognizing where they're at.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the fabric of a lot of small towns in America right now, unfortunately. And you bring up the dairy farming piece or the farming piece, and that's an industry right now that's undergoing some massive transformation. I know last year Wisconsin lost over 600, I want to say, dairy farms and leads the nation in Chapter 12 bankruptcies. And we're seeing that kind of happen all over the countryside around us. But business ingenuity sometimes stays the course. Tell us a little bit about who you are in your business world and what you do there.
Yeah. So I was hired as a commercial lender. Soon found out I did a little bit of interning for credit in my undergraduate work at a smaller community bank. And then I pursued, when I was hired, I was, you kind of get labeled, here's our new commercial lender. But I soon found out in a rural community bank, you don't get just to wear one hat. And the beauty of that is it's fantastic. You get to visit with all sorts of different types of businesses, people, different things going on. So the variety of that in and of itself has been really a neat experience. And quite now I can't really see myself in a large money center area just doing one thing. Certainly, 30 plus years into a career, that it's not just that. I mean, I could do it. I don't want to. You know, I think it would leave a massive hole in kind of how I like to, what I've been doing and what I like to do, that type of thing. Yeah.
You know, and that being said, we're doing business, doing what you do in a small town. I think that you know, I know that from my perspective from the restaurant, like if I did this in Madison, well, I'd be another restaurateur. You do it in Viroqua, like there's an identity piece that gets built into it. And sometimes there are positive and negative attributes to that identity piece. You know, I can't imagine that it's always easy, you know, hearing people's stories about why they need money, or you know, like going through and saying like, hey, actually, you know, this is not a good fit.
Yeah.
You know, in a small town, do you feel like that sometimes becomes a source of conflict, or do you have ways that you kind of like distance yourself from it?
I don't think distance myself from it's the right word. I think I am professionally guarded.
Sure.
There's a blessing and a curse with that. I always joke with some folks that, you know, being a professional skeptic is a difficult place to be, because you want half full glass, you know, half empty glass, you know, that type of thing. We're riding the rails of catching the enthusiasm of any business or any individual wanting to buy their first home or whatever it may be, and trying to help them make sure it's right for them, but also making sure it fits for where the bank's at in our philosophy and what we're trying to do. Now, a bank is a bank is a bank, but not necessarily. And so not in every situation is there a fit. And that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, that's part of it. That's why we've been able to have neighbors that we can be friendly with. We certainly have never historically been underbanked in our area, which is a good thing for all of us. There are options and choices and stuff like that. And it's always amazed me that by and large, and with little exception, have we never, it's a double negative, but never not been able to play in the sandbox together.
Sure.
From a bank perspective to help our community grow and keep moving.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, and Citizens First Bank does so many different things in the community to support different events and different initiatives. Can you talk a little bit about the philosophy at Citizens that, or your personal philosophy that has translated into all of these amazing things in the community and the support?
Yeah, I think a little bit. It just happens naturally. It happens historically by those that, you know, preceded us. It happens from ownership, culture of the bank, and to a certain extent by default, it's part of being in a smaller community. It's part of the fun and beauty of having kids in a variety of school systems that are available here that can participate in a variety of activities and not have to worry about whether or not you're going to make this or make that. By and large, everyone can participate. So I think about that with my kids coming up through the school, whether it be extracurricular, student council, or sports. I think about the same thing with respect to the bank and all the things and all the opportunities. Sometimes it's too much. It blows me away, quite frankly, over the last, not that it's always been present, but all the fantastic things that happen in or around this town, our communities in the county, of what's available to do, what's available to support. That's probably more than anything. The most difficult thing is just try to figure out where we can be and where we, not necessarily where we should be, but how we allocate resources, either by people power. Money power is easier, but it's not necessarily as rewarding.
Right.
You know, it may be a combination of both is the sweet spot type of thing. So, yeah, it's been fun. Certainly the hands-on stuff, I think, makes a better connection for us and for everyone. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna, you know, play the vulnerability card here. Started a business almost 6 years ago, and the advice that I was given is you gotta find an attorney, find an accountant, and find a bank. starting a business, coming to the table, and banking, I think it can be one of the most intimidating aspects, right? Because you don't really know what a person on your side of the table wants and needs in a situation to make the money work. What are the best first steps? I mean, let's just assume that we've incorporated the LLC online and we have that. What do we got to do to start this process?
It started somewhere,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
There's a story. There's a story behind your business. That's a great place to start. The intimidating part is whether or not wondering, do I have everything that they need? Do I need it now? Not knowing what I should be coming to the table with. I'll be honest with you. 9 times out of 10 or more, I prefer people just come in and talk, and part of that, if you will, kind of like we're doing right now, talking and getting to know each other about where I've been at and how it fits in the community and stuff. It's really understanding whether or not, number one, there's a fit, and number two, and I wouldn't even call it buy-in, just to understand where that business has been, where those individuals have been. And then here's the next critical point. Where do they want to go? In what speed and what time, what's their thoughts on it, and I think to a certain extent there might be some intimidation with respect to, business plan and all these types of things. And some of the best ones I've seen are a couple, 2-3 pages long. Some aren't even written down, but we help to shape them and to get it kind of put together and stuff like that. So, where do you start there?
Yeah.
I think just to try to get an understanding of where the passion is for what they want to do. And then, we share back and forth and try to give them some front end information. And this is another good thing about our community. I am not bashful about encouraging them to make sure they talk to at least one other financial. It's important. It's no different than talking to a prospective builder for a home. We have a lot of good builders in the area. But it's about, hey, you're going to be with this person, with this financial, hopefully for a long time. And so as much as possible, you try to see if there can be a relationship.
Yeah.
So,
that's super important. And, I think that that is one of the difficult pieces going through. I remember starting the cafe, like literally going to multiple banks with this idea and a really loose spreadsheet of what I thought was possible, plus a menu that I thought I really wanted to push. And, really it sharpens your acumen as an entrepreneur. Because people like yourself are very trained and schooled in hearing these proposals. I mean, I can't even imagine how many you've heard over the last 30 years. I can't imagine how many good ones you've heard over the 30 years, not to mention the bad, So it really does sharpen the acumen and the focus and intention of the business, which I think is great. But then once you get that process started, I say year 1, 2, and even in our case, year 3, has been very different than years 4, 5, and so far 6. In that first year, what are some of the things that you might put out there that are really important to pay attention to?
Yeah, it's going to sound, cash flow is king. I mean, the operating cycle of a new business and understanding as much as possible and trying to keep reins on what's going on and understanding that when things ebb and flow and where your as I call them, your liquidity needs, you got to have money in the checkbook
Right.
to meet what's going on. And that more than anything, until you get into some mode of maturity, short of other spikes that are a boon to the community that might, cause a spike into business, new product, new menu item, those types of things that have influences on things. That first year or first couple of years, just understanding your operating cycle. If you may have capital for, I've gained financing or had some coming in for equipment and stuff like that. But, you got to have the operating money when things get tight, recognizing, is it true operating, or is this going to be a longer term push into my funding base? How should I repay it? And those are sometimes difficult questions, even for me to understand until I get to know the business better.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, so we interviewed Mr. G a few weeks ago, and one of the things that he said that didn't really occur to me before, but I think it's really important, is that the cost of starting a business, especially when you're developing inventory, especially now and not in 1975, can
Right.
be really challenging,
Yeah.
and for a lot of people actually unaffordable without some loans and some other support. I think the loan process in general is another piece for new business owners that can be a little bit intimidating. Commercial loans and loans for inventory are very different than a mortgage on a house. The rates are different. The needs are different. Can you talk about some of those things and other ways that people looking for financing who are starting small businesses might be able to use services from you or another bank?
Yep. Mr. G's is a great example because if you're thinking about having an aisle full of Levi's, the inventory turn time it takes for you to buy it, get it in, and turn it around and sell it so you can actually capture that cost is quite a bit different than how you may need to turn a perishable item.
Yep.
Right.
Totally different, two different worlds, but both as equally as important on how those turn. The time, because you have spoilage. Now those jeans may be there. You may have risk of, style. Well, Levi's are Levi's, but my point is for that initial step into it, depending on the cost of entry, it deters a lot of it. That's a great example. Retail clothing and stuff like that. Wow. Highly competitive right now. I don't even know what the minimum order would be.
Well, some of the numbers that he was talking about and referencing, I think it would be really prohibitive for most people starting a business, especially on that scale.
Yeah, and him having a better understanding of where he needs to be when and how they're buying 6, 7, 8 months out in front of what's going on, and you can't control the weather and those types of things. Right. The best thing that I like to think about is, number one, I always try to put myself, if possible, into that business owner's shoes. Leverage is a wonderful thing, or it's not. And I leverage as in debt. The ability to take baby steps, or however you want to describe it, into politely using it as minimally as possible until you get your floats in the water, so you yourself understand maybe a growing business is probably one of the most difficult, especially if it's jettisoning, those types of things, is just, you got to treat it with the utmost care. It's like anything else, but it's your partner, but you got to pay attention to it, and you got to watch how whatever your product or service is, or combination of it is, how fast, where should you be in relation to your peers in the industry, given our demographic, for how long it should take you for a normal turn on any of that stuff, to keep that cycle going, to keep the cash going, so you can meet your longer term bills. And it's tough. It is daunting.
It is.
It
And I even to throw out the idea, like in a community that so in the first year, we understood that, like, on Friday and Saturday nights, there was a large percentage of our credit card swipes that were coming in from Madison, Minneapolis, Chicago, Milwaukee. We saw that, and we're like, wow, how did that happen?
Right.
And sometimes that actually produces more insecurity in that financial game than you think, because you want to, we want to expand to encompass all that. We want to be able to serve everyone. Yeah. And then, there's a law of diminishing returns in there somewhere. Just because you double the number of seats doesn't mean that you necessarily double the profits. Those costs go up as well. So, for smaller entrepreneurs who are going through this, like, how often would you say a check-in with a lender is important?
The door is always open.
Good idea.
Number one, we do tend to like to babysit things a little bit better on the front end.
Yeah.
And by that, it could be a combination of, hey, if you're not doing internal financials, have you hired someone local or someone that's helping you keep track of what you need to be looking at? So maybe quarterly. And the reality of it is, it's tough to even pop in to do that, but it's so important. And, we talk about, okay, you're good at what you do. Can you be everything to what you need to be to your business? So you talked about, I need good representation to start up my business. I need a good bank. I need a good accountant. I know what I can do, and I know I can do it well. But boy, you need those other players in place to make sure nothing goes one way or the other too far.
Yeah.
That being said, you need those partners there so that you can have conversations about it, so you do understand it. Because you do, as a business owner, you certainly need to understand what's going on. Even though it's not your main focus, it's not what you're doing. It's all part of it.
Yeah.
So it's very, so yeah, the door's open. And it depends on the person. There's some scary moments in any year.
Yeah.
And it's okay. We have conversations and you talk about solutions, or the duration, if you will, the length of time. Where do you expect things to be? What's going to change? Just some of those normal things that might be helpful to talk about. Not just because we're the bank, but it's a third party beyond arm's length.
Yeah.
Just to walk through some things. So
I've always found that the conversations that I have with you in the bank, I walk away with a different perspective. Usually, if it's a cash flow problem, or if it's even just a check-in, I go in there with one intention to talk about, and I walk out with a completely different perspective. And I think that that's really healthy. I think that really, it expands my understanding of being a business owner, which is great. Just quickly, like, what are some common mistakes? I mean, I could write you the laundry list for listeners at home. Like, don't do this. But
yeah, I think the biggest thing is getting grabbing too big of a plate out of the cupboard and wanting to put too much on it. That whole process of trying to keep reins on use of everything as you grow. Sometimes it's possible, sometimes it's not. But my comment earlier about using debt and how it can help you, as long as it's used the right way, that makes sense. So over projecting needs, maybe overbuilding capacity, those types of things that require capital, whether it's out of your own pocket or a combination of that and of financial institutions, those are dangerous things. On a wind out, if it doesn't turn out, those are, I always think about, if you're going to get into something, this is a terrible way to think about it. It's part of my being a professional skeptic, but how are you going to get out?
yeah.
This is an investment. I know it's your love and your passion for what you're going for, but if you can, step away from that. And is what you're doing saleable? Maybe more often than not, that's helpful, for some people to think about it that way. I wouldn't say everyone's overly zealous, but if I have, the checkbook, if you will, to help somebody, we have conversations about those types of things to make sure they use them. How much is enough to get going, so they don't get tipped one way or the other.
Yeah. I think that's kind of been a theme here in the podcast that we've talked about is the exit strategy for entrepreneurs who are going in. I will say that when we started the cafe, I was 34 years old and filled with optimism. Like, we've got this. This is something that, the world wants, the world needs. We are doing this, and we've been fortunate to be successful in it. Now, as we get into our 6th year, we're like, okay, how do you get out?
Yeah.
There are processes in that regard. What does it look like to get out of a business, specifically in a small community? You know, what should people be thinking about?
Well, number one, it depends on who your audience is and what you're selling. I think the place sells itself. That's not an unbiased comment. Regardless of whether or not you're making it and selling it here or making it and selling it somewhere else, as far as a place to be, I think we're good with that. I do think businesses need to recognize, to a certain extent, that the marketing time may be different. You know, so the horizon that you may look at as far as the saleability, if it's in your wishes to continue the business in someone else's hands, that it may need to be longer. Now, life deals us, you know, things that sometimes we don't expect, and we may not have that luxury, but of time sometimes. But you know, those are probably the biggies. And as you're building and working and passionate and maybe getting into, I don't know if 6 years is a mature mode. I'm not sure. You know, but as you think about
You'd probably
those
know
things,
better than anybody.
yeah. You know, it's not unhealthy to think about it. Is what I'm building and what I'm doing worth something to someone else? It's worth something to me. I mean, I get that. I can feel it from business customers, but is it going to be worth something to someone else? That's no different than my father-in-law selling the farm to my brother-in-law, my wife's brother. I mean, they've worked, you know, since they're, you know, but is there value for him to go get a bunch of leverage, of debt, you know, and continue the family farm? Is it viable? You know, those type, you've got the land, you've got things you can count on. So, those types of conversations with a spouse, a business partner, are important.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know, you know, for all the energy and love and passion to get put into a business, because you're putting, especially, and I haven't had my shoes there, but you made the comment on the first part. I don't know if we were on here or not, but you said, I like to be liked. You know, at its root, that's it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you know, we're doing what we do. We don't have to be best buds, you know, or that kind of stuff. But when you're a small business, boy, you got everything out there.
Yeah.
You know, so everything you've got into it, you know, it's good to have those gut checks and reality checks on whether or not it's good for someone else. Are you creating value that is saleable? So whether you call it your reward or maybe reinventing yourself to do something else, can you make that transition versus just a you know, a GOB going out of business sale or something like that, and a liquidation, or those are tough deals.
Always.
You know?
Always.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, knock on wood, that doesn't happen. To anyone, but I do believe understanding what that exit looks like. And, you know, you had mentioned when we were talking about the coast to coast, you know, if it's a reinvention of the job or a career at a certain point, you know, it's hard. I mean, I had an interview earlier today where we talked about how being a chef is not just about cooking food anymore. You have to be a marketer. You have to be an advocate. You have to be, you know, 90% of what I do takes place outside of the kitchen.
Yeah.
It literally does. And to be successful, even moderately successful, you have to be invested in that part, you know, and I think that is definitely something that no one could have ever explained to me in the beginning. It only makes sense in the beginning through the dollars and cents.
Yeah.
So there are resources available, obviously. Before someone comes in to talk to you at Citizens First Bank, you know, what are some of the things they can check out to do a little research on their own about lending programs, or even specifically, like I was under the the impression that there are grants out there. Like, oh, how do I get a grant?
Isn't there a big fat book of them?
Yeah,
where that guy in that multicolored jacket
Exactly.
goes, look at all this free money you
Look
can
at all
have.
this free money.
Yeah, there's a bunch of it out there. I just don't know how to get at it.
Exactly.
You know? And the combination of the resources, it's kind of like it's buyer beware. It's okay to research. We have certainly an opportunity to garner all sorts of information with respect to it, and readily and quickly, from the internet, certainly. And it's difficult depending on, the type of business and those types of things. We're blessed in the county with, an active chamber. We've got, Sue at Vita and a lot of mentors, if you will, to say, how do I think about going and doing this, let alone the Small Business Development Center up at UW La Crosse,
Right.
SCORE, and some other professionals that have been there, done that, and are here to offer their time and energy for things to be thinking about. So there's lots of free information out there, and enough of it that I think with balanced of, online and in person, a person can be cagey enough to make sure they have balance and bumper rails on the process to see what makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, Tom, I just want to say, with sincerity, thank you so much. The dedication to the community, and I think that's bar none. And watching it and ushering it through transitional times, and being here with us today, we really appreciate that. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Have a great spring if it gets here.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
We're hoping it will. It will. So.
Eventually, it will creep its way in. You've been listening to the 54665, all things rural economic development, all things small town, and all things Viroqua. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time.